Welcome back to another episode of the RoundTable Discussion Podcast. We are here with Dr. Karrie Walters. She is and here we go, the clinical director of the Comprehensive Diagnostic Assessment Center in the HETCO Clinic at the University of Oregon, Part 1, and full-time faculty in the Counseling, Psychology, and Human Services Department as well. You are an expert in, shall I say, the transgender experience of young children. Would that be a good overarching kind of description of your interest?
Hey, yeah, absolutely a good overarching description of one of my interests. It's interesting, right? Because I didn't start off in the field as wanting to make research on transgender kids and gender nonconforming kids and non-binary kids, a focus of study and interest. And then I ended up married to a trans man and raising a gender creative nonconforming kiddo. And then suddenly switch focus, right? So I'm not a research professor, so that's not my primary research, but it is one of my primary clinical foci, both from a personal experience and from giving workshops and working with lots of groups of clinical organizations and students.
All right, perfect. You did exactly what I love. It's my favorite part about all of this is the personal, okay? So if you want to kind of start there.
Yeah, sure. One of the things I like to do is translate research kind of to practice and help people understand that translation. We have some amazing research going on with transgender kids and non-conforming kids right now. And so what I can do is take that research, interpret it, and then help translate that research to practice for my students and for other clinical folks in the field, and incorporate my own personal lived experience with that research to help people kind of translate that to how do we help work with kids and families.
Oh my gosh, you're a master. I love it. I love it because I don't think just from the research side as a student, I'm not sure people realize how not very often the research is then translated into practice. Like it's there, the answers exist. There are millions of journals, but that's amazing. So we definitely will touch on that. Let's talk about your personal experience. I want to understand more about that because you said you didn't start off with the intent of doing research in the transgender, area or field of interest. So what brought you into that?
So think about how far back do you go, right? I came out as a lesbian in the 90s when you weren't supposed to do that, right? So I had that whole experience. And then I met, the love of my life, and they eventually came out as trans. And so we went through that transition, and I learned so much about what it means to be trans, what it means to be a trans man, and just, working through our new relationship and what that means to me. And then we had a kiddo, and that kiddo ended up around, age 2 or 3, showing, interest in activities and presentations and appearances that were not conforming to, the gender we were assigning him, right? So he was born as presenting as a boy, and he's still, and we'll get to this eventually, but he still firmly identifies as a boy. And he was very presenting as wanting all the things that you would think traditionally, again, stereotypically, we assign to girls. And again, even that's using kind of a binary language. But suddenly here's this little, 3-year-old wanting all the dresses he could possibly find and being drawn to all the sparklies. And so that was my first foray into personally experiencing so much of the pushback from society. I remember he was really little. He was like, 3, and he was in his preschool. And I picked him up, and he grabbed this pink purse from the play area to get a dress up. And one of the other 3-year-old boys looked at him and said, you can't have that. That's for girls. And I remember thinking, oh my gosh, this starts so early.
Yeah, the pushback, not just experience for is it him pronouns?
Yeah, absolutely. Yep.
For him, but also that other 3-year-old child, right? Like It's not just from adults who have quote unquote a higher education or understanding of these concepts, but young children programmed, not knowing any better, like that pushback is there too.
No, and it got harder and harder. It was easier when he was younger, but it was still hard. Like I remember, so he is my dancer, and he's focused on being a professional dancer when he grows up. So he's working really hard now as an almost 14-year-old. But at
All about it. I got extra point shoes, tights. I'll send them
oh,
your way. Definitely need to use.
but at 4 is when he came to me. It was actually really cute. He came to me and it was like, "Mama, I need to take dance lessons." And I'm like, "Okay, there's all kinds of like this fun." He was like, "No, I want dance lessons." Oh, okay. But we signed him up for a dance class, and it's still a little kid dance class, and he took the class no problem. And at the very end of the class, there's going to be a performance, and I remember this mom picking up this really big box, and she poured it out, and out fell all of these pink and yellow tutus, and his little eyes just lit up, and he was like moving his body towards this heaven of tutus. And one of the parents stopped him and said, "No, no, no, that's not for you. Boys don't wear these. You have to wear these." And these little vests. His little face just fell. And of course, I'm like Mama Bear moment. I'm like, "Nope, that's not happening. You're gonna get to wear the tutu. There's no reason you can't." And I they said no, and I ended up talking to the director, and she said, "Well, if he was a trans girl, then we would let him, but since he identifies as a boy, then he's not allowed to wear the tutus." So I was like, "Well, that's it. We're not doing the show." And he was like, "Mama, I'm doing the show." So I still remember him like just kind of sucking it up and going out there and doing the show. But after that, we changed studios, and I had to call around and find like 4 different phone calls to studios, and no one would let him wear tutus and pink ballet shoes. It was crazy. Finally, I found one studio, and I kind of broke down and cried when they like on the phone were celebrating that and not just allowing it. Yeah, they were a bit Flex Studios, Eugene, Oregon. But anyway,
I love the shout out. I love the name drop. There you go.
yeah, but for real, I think they saved his life on some level. I mean, at least saved his mental health, because from the age of 5 until around the age 10, when he was wearing a lot of female stereotypical clothing and appearances, that was a place that they literally celebrated him, and he felt that celebration. And in so many other places, he had to hide himself, and he told me, Flex is the one place I can be totally me. Before that, it's a lot of, where are we going today? Do I have to hide who I am? Do I not have to hide who I am? And of course, me as a mom, I never want him to hide, right? But I'm not the one who has to walk through the world constantly being assessed. It's interesting. So the world right now has this very binary gender, and it's changing, which I love, because we know gender is not binary, right? But we still have these dichotomous categories that the world is working in gender, and constantly there was not a place for him as a kind of gender non-conforming boy. And for a while he was identifying as non-binary as well, and it was but times are changing. So even back then, this is like 5 years ago, we didn't really have as many people aware of using they pronouns and the non-binary. So we would go into stores, and he had some long hair. If he was wearing a dress, he'd be like, just, if they call me, and if they call me she, let's just keep it, because I don't want to bother correcting them, right? And some days he'd be like, actually, I feel like more like a girl today. Go ahead and definitely don't correct them if they use a female pronoun. And other days he'd be like, "Oh my gosh, can you correct them, Mama? I want them to see all of me. I'm both boy and girl. But I don't want to bother correcting them, but I do want them to be corrected." So then, like, we would just, pull in a parking lot, and I'd be like, "Okay, what do you want me to do right now?" Right? Because it's up to you. Do you want me to correct people, not correct people? And it was just this constant, creativity. So,
I love that you address that as a process of creativity, right?
But
Because
Diane, so Professor Diane, Dr. Diane Aronsoft uses this concept of gender creativity. And it was invaluable to me as a parent who was trying to navigate this process. So her work was really invaluable.
jumping back to your experience at the first dance studio, they stated that if he was a transgendered girl, they would allow him to wear the tutus, but because he wasn't, so that's kind of, I feel like that kind of highlights a double-edged sword, and you can kind of guide me on this thought that even though we have the understanding that there's, that there are other ways of gender expression, that those still are used against the ability to genuinely express, right? Like, okay, that's those set of ideas or thoughts or whatever that were formulated in said studio owner's mind were that they could use those dichotomies to decide how the structure was.
If you fit in one of the two boxes, we can work with you. So if you're male and you present as traditionally male, great. And then if you are female, and then you can present as traditionally female. So they were saying, if he is female, if he's a girl, he is allowed to present traditionally as a girl. So if he's a trans girl, he can wear dresses because that's what girls wear. But he has to go into one of these boxes, right? He can't be a boy and also want to wear the dresses. Like, you have to either be boy, girl, but fit a box and fit what we expect you to appear in those boxes as society. So if he didn't fit a box, and that was just not okay. And I mean, I think that the dance world is especially gendered, and it is changing, which is wonderful, but not everywhere. This is here in Eugene, Oregon, and we're changing a lot. I think quicker than maybe a lot of some other places. Right?
The irony that the arts, dance specifically, of all fields of interest or study or there's plenty of history to show that is, gender norms did not used to, bind people to the roles they played in the arts. Like, I don't think people realize that gender norms and these, constructs and boxes society seems to be, to have had for forever, are not forever. They're relatively new in the history of human existence. So I'm glad that
we get so emotionally invested in that part, right? Even though, and that's
right.
something that changed so much, right? So if you are, if you identify, or if you are female and you're wearing pants, usually you're not waking up and saying, I want to present as masculine today, when you're wearing pants. So pants have become neutral, but they weren't neutral in this country, kind of Western society, even 50 years ago, right? But dresses are still, at least in this kind of white Western Christian based messaging, dresses are still just for females, right? And so that hasn't changed, but there's still, pants have changed to be neutral, dresses are still just for girls. There's nothing really fundamentally different about these two pieces of clothing, but they have, one has drastically changed the gender message that's allowed in society. I show a picture with my students of Teddy Roosevelt as like a 6-year-old in a dress. But again, he wasn't, as far as we know, a gender nonconforming kiddo. This was just how you dressed little 4-year-old boys at the time. And so it's just changed dramatically. But even though that's one of the things that has changed so much, we have so much emotion behind that. I was just always in shock about how upset people would be about my child not fitting one of these boxes. And it was exhausting. And for me, and it's especially exhausting for a little 7-year-old.
Oh yeah. I mean, I can't imagine who it's more exhausting for. You, in the sense that you kind of understand in a more abstract way, on a bigger scale of impact, like what kind of, like, the heaviness of that treatment is, or for him, as he sorts through this identity at a young age, right? And he hasn't even gotten to maybe even understanding the grander scheme of things per se, right, as you do. And so my heart is heavy for that experience, but I also imagine, and I perceive your experience personally and your work as the Trailblazing Moments, right? You're the warriors that are presenting to people, um, you're like mirrors, honestly. There's so many ways to look at this. And anytime I think of those who are emotionally invested, I'm very interested in this idea of people's emotional investment in things that make them uncomfortable or that they disagree with, because it usually it stems back to something as simple as just a fear of change. Because when you ask anyone who might have a disagreement with what your boy wears, it's like, does that affect the food on your table, the sleep that you have, the house that you live in, the well-being of your existence? Then why do you care? Right. And so, I'm wondering, like, what what do you think it takes to ask that question without sounding as pompous as I just did?
Right. Well, I think there's two levels to that. Like there's a level of me educating people, and in that way, trying to come alongside where they're at, understand their understandings, misunderstandings, fears, to try to come alongside them is much better than pushing directly back. But as a mom for my kid, trying to make a safe place for him, that was a little bit of a different story, right? So, um, we did a lot of there's so many places I can go here, right? It's just like I'm thinking of two different things. So like we did a lot of guidance and trying to both help organize his environment so that the people around him were supportive, and teaching him how to respond back to any non-supportive comments that he did. So we did a lot of that. Um, but then I also had to work through my own emotional process. Um, which one do you want me to talk about? I could talk about both, but which one do you want me to talk about first?
Let's I want to know so much about both. I have so many questions already. So let's start with his, simply because I'm interested in knowing a little bit more about the tools and how he interpreted the tools that you gave him. Right. And also kind of talk about the age phase, because age I know is a huge part of this conversation and development.
Right. So, and I can actually do a little bit almost at the same time, a little bit. So when he was, it's interesting, when he was younger, 3, 4, 5, um, it was considered, cute by people in many ways. And again, we had those issues with some of the dance studios, but for a lot of people, if he was in a grocery store and he was a 5-year-old little boy and, he was wearing a dress, and people said, oh, cute little girl. And he's like, I'm a boy. They'd be like, oh, how cute. Right. But when you're 9, right, and you're continuing to be gender nonconforming, people don't think it's cute anymore. We talked a lot for him when he was probably 5, 6, 7, getting into that stage where people were starting to do more judgments, of talking about how, just really giving him information about this gender binary that society is wrapped up around, right? And about how that's incorrect. We talked a lot about how, kids' brains are kind of tricked into thinking that only pink or only dresses are for girls. So we tried to make it so that other people just had the wrong information and he actually knew the right information. A great example of that, we also did a lot of work with helping him. We role played, practice standing up for himself, right? I remember one time he was his very first t-ball game, and he had this pink bat with hearts on it, right? And I knew, I was like, okay, so we've practiced, like, okay, so when you get to the ball game and if somebody says something, what are you going to say? And what if they say this? So we role played, um, and so we did all that to kind of give him some support. But I was Mama Bear. I was like, there's a lot of other little boys around you, right? And so he put his pink bat up. And I, of course, first thing somebody said was, what's the girl bat doing here? There's not any girls on this team. And he's, brave little 6-year-old. He was like, that's mine. Boys can have pink bats too. And of course you're like, no, you can't. And he tried to push back a little bit more, but was kind of struggling. So, I was definitely right there, and I jumped in, and I was like, oh my gosh, you guys' brains have been tricked. I always feel so sad when I see kids' brains have been tricked. You were tricked into thinking that colors were only for certain kids. Actually, lots of boys like pink bats. Did you know that? And they're little, like, no. and then as he got older, we did a lot of making sure he saw representations of himself. So like when he first saw his first drag queens, he was in love, and um just head over heels, like, really, wow. And he was like, these are my people. And just to watch him light up and to watch him be able to get photos and selfies with his favorite people, and really feel that he can be seen and celebrated was really wonderful. And there were some people in our lives that weren't as supportive, and so I had to do a lot of work talking to them and say, we can't have you in our lives if you're not going to be supportive, right? So there was one family that we hung out with just on the peripheral, but they were not accepting, and we stopped hanging out with that family. And there's a point where I feel like, yes, on one edge I want to educate, on the other edge I don't want my child to be closely around anyone who is sending him messages that he's not okay, right? So that was an important piece. And for me, it was interesting. I think you mentioned when we first started talking about Diane Aronoff's quote in her book that being a gender creative is being suspended in a state of not knowing. And you brought that up to me in the very beginning about that quote. And that spoke to me emotionally. So here I had this little kid, and for a while he was identifying as both boy and girl. And so, I had some people telling me I'm confusing him because I'm letting him wear dresses and letting him say, oh, I feel I'm both boy and girl. And I had other groups of friends that were saying, we're holding him back from identifying as a trans girl. Why don't we push him to just finally come out? And I was all feeling inside, like, I wish I just knew, like, if I knew if he was going to identify as a girl, and if he was just struggling with that, like if he would come out as a trans girl, I knew exactly how to support him. Right. Or if he was going to be, just, gender, non-conforming boy, I can support that. But for a while, when he was 6 or 7 and he was saying, I think I'm both boy and girl, or I'm non-binary, we tried they for a while, then he wanted to go back to he. And I wanted just to know. And what I had to come to terms with is my job was to give him space to walk his own gender journey. Right. So that was my job, is to hold that unknown space and tell him it's okay. Right. To not know exactly how either your gender identity or your gender expression, and be able to have some space to walk that path, and just to support him every day, right? Even if things change a little bit day to day, we're there for him, and we accept him 100%. So yes, so that's what we ended up.
Now I can see where, your side of the experience kind of ties into providing the tools and what you had to, standing in and speaking up for your son to a bunch of boys, like little boys, like that's one thing. And then I'm sure you had to deal with parents, on another hand, like where do you feel in your experience before you had a kid, you were, whether you realized it or not, preparing or prepared to take this route? Because I'm assuming, like most human beings, there's an experience, or there's a part of your life, there's something that you grew up around or learned that made it possible at all for you to do what any other parent possibly could do, in accepting that unknown, right? Because I can't help think about, like, there's so many unknowns. My mom wanted to know that I would be safe all the time. I was the only child with a single mother, so helicopter, right? But that was one of her unknowns, is my safety. And there's just so many. There's so many, and across the span of possibilities for your children. So why is this one so much more difficult for parents?
Oh, it's interesting. I thought you were going to ask another question of what experience did I have that prep me to handle the unknown?
Yeah, answer that one first. Yeah, because I'm trying to understand the disconnect. Like, what's missing in the understanding of parents that didn't have whatever you're about to share with me?
Um, I'll remark of a connection I just made from what you were saying, and then I'll remark on that one. So, because I didn't even think about that, like what prepared me to handle walking this path of not knowing, um, and being able to emotionally hold that. And I actually it just came back from a backtracking trip where we were actually talking about this. So it was like, wow. So in a very, very short summary of what I was talking about on this backpacking trip, um, is like I grew up in the Catholic faith that told me exactly what the capital T truth was. And I left the Catholic faith because that made me mad. And it was like this big mystery of life that we call God is too big to fit in a box. And I actually explored several different religious beliefs in college to try to find a path. And every religion I looked at tried to tell me what the capital T truth was. And I didn't want that. I wanted to find a spiritual community that allowed me to sit with the unknown and sit with the mystery. And actually, I eventually found I was gonna have. So I was like, "There's just no religion. I'm just gonna be non-religious at all, and that's fine. I'll just be spiritual and find my own path." But I did want a community, and I read this article at one point that basically said exactly what I believed, and I said, "Who wrote this?" And it was from this Reconstructionist Judaism um, perspective. And so I found this spiritual community that embraces the unknown and says that that's okay. It's okay to embrace an unknown and to walk as community and just focus on our values and what's important. Um, and so now that you said that, I never made that connection, but I really do think that helped then step into this next path of I don't know the best way to support him. I don't know what the answer is. Like, I don't know what the answer is going to be. I don't know how he's going to identify when he gets older. Um, but what I can do is just let myself sit in this state of unknowing and focus on our values. And that's what we did. We focused on our values of, whoever you are is valid and wonderful and good. And we're just going to support that and let you know that you can, yeah, just love, validation, support.
Dr. Karrie, I did not expect that answer. Let me just be clear up front right now. That's a wonderful answer. I love. Thank you for sharing that. First off, yeah, I've noticed, and one of my favorite things about just anyone and everyone who finds themselves serving in the human service profession, whatever role that might be, directly or indirectly, we all come to these positions from experience, usually, and so yeah, there's always something that prepares you, whether you know it at the time or not, for you what you later embrace as whether it be professional interest or passion related to this field. So I did not expect that, though. I really didn't.
You were like, what prepared you for this concept of being able to be in the state of unknowing? I was like, oh yeah, I bet that's it. That's so interesting.
Right. Well, I almost kind of, and I'll be blunt with you, I almost kind of expected it to be something related to your own, expression of, your sexuality and your own gender, but, wrong. I was wrong. I'm glad I was wrong. So glad I was wrong. Right.
What's interesting though, because all my experience, like I identify as a cis woman, and I've always presented either kind of gender neutrally or feminine, and so I never had to walk that particular path. Now, when I did come out, that was that was a whole experience because no one knew what it wasn't in the vernacular. I grew up in a small town of like 8,000 people.
Yeah, stranger danger, satanic panic, all that stuff.
Exactly. Yeah. So, um, yes. So, and then the other piece again was like this push again between people wanting us. Not only my anxiety of not knowing, so wanted to know, and then I had people from all sides of my community wanting to have a firm answer, right? And everybody just needing to just wait and not know, and right, and there isn't a, and what I found out, there isn't a destination, right? We needed to put aside the idea of what is his destination going to be, and just say again, everybody has their own gender journey, and you just support where that person is. And just like I have my own Jewish journey, and there doesn't need to be like a final destination for him. um and eventually people usually come into their being about who I am. And I think now at 13 and a half, he's in a very different place. I think around 10, 9, 10, he stopped as much wearing stereotypical, and I keep saying that, right? Because I think, dresses can be for boys too. They could be boy things, but for right now, but he started presenting more stereotypically male. And a bunch of things were turning on at that time. He was starting to have crushes on girls. He was starting to notice more and be more in tune. Well, that's not true, because he was always in tune with what people thought, but he was, middle school, right? You're just starting to be much more, I think, sensitive to what the peer norms are. And I think for him, that was an important to kind of fit in that way. Then he stopped at dance as well, and he actually started feeling uncomfortable in dance. And so they said, do you want the girl outfit? He'd be like, no, I don't even ask me anymore. I always want the boy presenting outfit. And that was great. They just kind of went with it. Although I do remember him, talking to me and saying, I wonder if people are feeling like sad about that. Like, this is who I have been for so long, and now I don't feel like this is me anymore. I feel like more male presenting clothing and appearance is more me. And but I've been known so long as like, this kiddo who is this boy who wears dresses, especially in dance. And so we had to talk through that about, again, this is just you, right? So whatever it feels authentically you, that's what you need to do. And people will support that. And if they're not going to support that, they don't need to be in our circle. So now, like, he's 13 and a half, and he's even more secure in who he is. And he identifies as, he is a cis male who has crushes on girls. And he is feeling more comfortable now than he did at 11, 12, doing things like, having pink onesies with unicorns and sparkles. And I think he like had to like really present as male for a while, and kind of really hold on to that. And center himself in that. And then now he's coming on the other side of being able to be a little bit more fluid again, even though fluid and creative in his gender presentation, as he's gotten more solid in identifying as a cis male.
I have to imagine that your son's just, I don't want tolerance, maybe, patience is incredibly off the charts for someone who's 13 and a half, right? Like,
he's gone through his own process for sure. He definitely has more self-awareness, I think, than other kids.
That's beautiful. I really hope that's right? Say that again.
He's had to. It's like good and bad, right? So
yeah, absolutely. He's definitely been through more depth of experience for that to be the case. But and this is only from my perspective, but it's not as if, he would have never experienced those kind of challenges, whether they be minute or extreme, at any point in his life, right? So it's just kind of, you kind of started it early, right? He experienced it a little bit early. He earned that old soul badge, like, and that's incredible. And I can only imagine that the two of you are super, super close.
Our whole family is really close. And I'll say my partner's not here after he walked by. I'm not sure you saw him, but him being a trans man, I think really helped Gabriel know that we had, like, he knew early on he had so many options. I think that really did help him too. He knew he could be a cis male, he could be trans, binary trans, he could be a trans girl, or he could come out if he was a girl. He could know that we totally would support him if he said, actually, I am a girl, and we would have his back instantly. And so I think part of what was helpful is he knew he had options that were completely supportive. Like, he knew the whole spectrum. So he didn't have a family that said, these are the only two boxes you could have. He had a family that said, there is a wide way of gender expression, and there are more than two boxes and of gender, and here are all the options that are available to you. And I think that helped him take his time and be able to explore himself in a place of kind of self love and support. Uh, and he knew early on, even age 3, 4, the wide variety of gender options that were available to him, both expression and identity.
I definitely, in our follow-up conversations, want to talk about that that early exposure that he had and what it allowed as far as his understanding at an early age, because whether that's a controllable factor or not in the experience of transgendered youth. But before, one last question before we kind of wrap it up for this talk, and that is, do you think that the experience of transgender children, that family is an absolute, their understanding of the experience or what to expect, or the knowledge to say that there are more than just two boxes, right, is necessary in a healthy development of becoming, or developing a transgendered identity? Like, what if your son hadn't had you? Do you think that he still would have been able to completely or fully experience, this development that you've seen so far?
Right. My first instinct is to say no, and then I think, well, I have to be careful about saying, yes or no. I have to look at the research on all that, right? But I think for optimal mental health and emotional health of any transgender, gender nonconforming, gender creative kid, this with research we know over and over and over, supportive parents is essential. Now, the level of knowledge that parents have to offer a supportive environment, like I'm not sure I can speak to that. Like, you have to know these 5 things in order to be supportive. But being supportive is essential.
I'm so glad you made that distinction, because
right.
just having the openness, we'll call it, to what you do not know, is the first step. Just like you had the openness before, you didn't have the words, but perfect. All right, well, it is now pouring down here at my place. Okay. So I'm going to wrap it up. Thank you so much, y'all, for tuning in. And we will have Dr. Karrie Walters back soon to discuss even more of her work. She's got so much to offer. I'm very excited. Just a heads up, next weekend is our national virtual conference. If you have not registered yet, you can still do so on our website. There you'll find the schedule for next weekend, the speaker bios, and all the topics we're getting into. Stay home, log on, and let's talk about it. See you next weekend, y'all.